Okay, ready for a deep dive into the mind of one of Shakespeare's most notorious characters.
Always up for a challenge, especially with a character as complex as Shylock.
Right, he's one of those figures who just gets under your skin. We're talking Merchant of Venice, of course,
Mhm.
and we're going to try to unlock what makes him tick using a fascinating lens, the Enneagram.
Ah, the Enneagram. Always a good time for a little personality exploration. So, which type are we pinning on Shylock today?
Well, our source material today suggests he's a textbook example of a type 4, specifically the sexual 4 subtype.
Ooh, interesting. The passionate, intense ones. The ones who feel everything so deeply. Okay, for our listeners who might not be familiar with the Enneagram, give us the type 4 rundown.
Yeah, break it down.
So, type 4s, often called the individualist, are known for their incredible emotional depth. They long to be seen as unique, special even.
And often feel misunderstood, right? Like they just don't quite fit in with everyone else.
Exactly. That feeling of being different, of not belonging, becomes a driving force in their lives. It's this constant search for identity, for a place where they truly belong.
So we're talking about your classic brooding artists, your passionate poets, the ones who always seem a little out of sync with the rest of the world.
You've got it. And with the sexual force subtype, as you might guess from the name, that intensity gets channeled into their
Oh,
relationships.
so they're bringing all that emotional baggage to the table.
Well, it's more nuanced than that. They crave deep connection, recognition from their partners. But there's also this underlying fear of abandonment, of being unseen, unappreciated. It's a tricky combination.
Sounds like a recipe for some pretty dramatic relationship patterns.
You could say that.
And this is where Antonio Fernandez Guerrero's analysis really hooked me. He makes a compelling case for Shylock as a sexual 4. One of the first things he points to is Shylock's famous "hath not a Jew eyes" speech.
Oh, that speech is just heartbreaking. It cuts right to the core of Shylock's pain, his vulnerability. He's not just arguing a point of law there, he's crying out for basic human dignity.
Right, he's demanding to be seen as an equal, not just some caricature of a Jewish moneylender.
And that, my friend, is classic type 4. That deep yearning for respect, for equal treatment, it's all tied up with their sense of identity.
And we can't forget the historical context here. Shylock is a Jewish man living in a deeply anti-Semitic society. Talk about feeling like an outsider.
Absolutely. Imagine that constant pressure, that feeling of being different, of not being accepted for who you are, day after day, year after year.
It's like his entire world is reflecting back this message that he's not worthy, not deserving of love, of belonging, of even basic human decency.
Exactly. And that kind of chronic rejection, that feeling of being less than, goes straight to the heart of the sexual force fears. It creates this immense pressure cooker of emotion.
So we're talking about a man who's deeply wounded, deeply insecure. And to cope with that pain, he builds up these walls, he lashes out, he demands his pound of flesh.
Which is where things get really interesting, right? Because Guerrero argues that Shylock's rage, his resentment, especially towards Antonio, stems from this deep-seated envy. He even uses terms like cannibalistic envy to describe this dynamic.
Okay, cannibalistic envy. I'll admit that one threw me for a loop at first. It's not like Shylock literally wants to eat Antonio.
No, not literally. Though with Shakespeare, you never know. But it's more about this deep-seated desire to possess what you feel you lack.
So, like, fill in the blank, right?
Right. It's like Shylock looks at Antonio, who seemingly has it all, wealth, social standing, acceptance, and it fuels this desire to almost consume a part of him.
To kind of absorb some of that, whatever it is he thinks Antonio has that he's missing.
Precisely. It's this desperate attempt to fill that void within himself.
So instead of just seeing a greedy moneylender, we start to see a man driven by this profound sense of lack, of being denied something he so desperately craves.
And that's the beauty of using the Enneagram as a lens. It adds this whole other layer of complexity to the character.
It's like suddenly Shylock's actions, as unsettling as they are, start to make a lot more sense.
Because we're seeing them through the lens of his deepest motivations, his deepest wounds.
And that's where we're going to pick things up in our next part. We'll explore how this cannibalistic envy, this yearning to possess, might actually be at the heart of Shylock's infamous demand for a pound of flesh. I mean, demanding a pound of flesh. It just seems so barbaric. But, you know, if we look at it through the lens of the sexual 4, maybe it's not so much about the flesh itself, right?
Right, it's more about what it represents.
Exactly.
That need to kind of strike back at the world that has hurt him so deeply.
It's like this primal scream, you know, like, see? Feel my pain.
Exactly. And I think Shakespeare, being the master of human nature that he was, understood that.
Oh, absolutely. He got that sometimes people lash out, not because they're inherently bad.
But because they're hurting?
Yes.
Yeah.
Hurt, and they don't know how else to express it. And that's what makes Shylock such a powerful character, right? He's not just some one-dimensional villain.
He's complex, he's flawed, he's deeply human.
And that's where the Enneagram can be such a useful tool, because it reminds us to look beyond those surface-level judgments, right?
Absolutely. It's about trying to understand the why behind the what.
Yes. Why does someone behave the way they do? What's going on beneath the surface? And with Shylock, it's like, yeah, his actions are extreme, but can we blame him for being so full of rage?
Especially given what he's up against. The constant prejudice, the mockery, the dehumanization, it's bound to create this pressure cooker of emotions.
And Guerrero, in his analysis, he uses this really interesting phrase when he's talking about the sexual force anger. He calls it, and forgive me, listeners, if I mispronounce this, he calls it cannibalistic rage.
It's a strong word, cannibalistic, and I can see how it might seem a little shocking. But it's important to remember that we're talking about extreme emotional states here.
So not literal cannibalism, right?
No, definitely not. But it's this idea that the sexual force rage can be so intense, so all-consuming, that it feels like it wants to devour everything in its path.
Like a force of nature.
Exactly. And it's not pretty, but it's a part of who they are. And it's often rooted in this deep sense of lack.
Like they're trying to fill a void within themselves by taking from others.
In a way, yes. It's like they're so desperate for something they feel is missing that they'll do whatever it takes to get it, even if it means hurting others in the process.
Which kind of makes you wonder, what if Shylock had found a healthier way to deal with all that pain, all that rage? What if he had someone in his life, someone who could truly see him, understand him, love him for who he was?
Now that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's a question that I think we all grapple with on some level. How do we deal with the pain and the anger that life throws our way?
And how do we break free from those cycles of hurt and revenge that can feel so deeply ingrained in our society?
Right. Because it's easy to look at a character like Shylock and judge him, condemn him.
But what good does that do?
Exactly. It's far more productive and I think ultimately more compassionate to try to understand where he's coming from.
To see him as a product of his circumstances. To recognize that he's both a victim and a perpetrator of the same system of oppression.
Exactly. And that's what makes The Merchant of Venice such a powerful and enduring work of art.
Because it forces us to confront these uncomfortable truths about ourselves, about our own capacity for both love and hate, compassion and cruelty.
And it reminds us that we all have a choice to make. Do we perpetuate the cycle of pain or do we choose a different path?
It's like he's trapped in this cycle of pain and he can't see a way out.
Exactly. And that's the tragedy of it all, isn't it? He's so focused on righting the wrongs that he's become blind to the humanity of others.
And even to his own humanity in a way.
Right. Right. It's like he's lost sight of who he is in all that anger and resentment.
It's heartbreaking. Because we see these glimpses of his better nature, don't we? His love for Jessica, his grief over Leo.
And they do. And those moments make his downfall even more tragic. Because you realize that he's capable of love, of connection.
But he's chosen a different path. A path of revenge and isolation.
And that's the thing about the Enneagram, isn't it? It doesn't excuse our behavior, but it does help us understand it.
It gives us a framework for recognizing those patterns, those motivations that drive us.
And it reminds us that we all have a choice to make.
To choose love over hate, forgiveness over revenge.
Exactly. It's not easy, but it's always possible. And I think that's ultimately the message that I take away from The Merchant of Venice.
Me too. It's a reminder that even in the darkest of times, even when we're faced with unimaginable cruelty, we can choose a different path.
We can choose compassion. We can choose understanding. We can choose to break the cycle of pain.
That's a powerful message.
Mm-hmm.
And it's one that feels as relevant today as it did in Shakespeare's time.
Absolutely. So the next time you encounter a Shylock in your own life, someone who's angry, who's hurting, who's lashing out, try to remember this conversation.
Try to see the world through their eyes, even if just for a moment.
You might not agree with their actions, but maybe, just maybe, you'll start to understand them.
And that understanding, that empathy, it's the first step towards creating a more compassionate and just world.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
This has been an incredible deep dive. I always learn so much from these conversations.
Me too. It's been a pleasure, as always.
Until next time, keep exploring, keep asking questions, and keep diving deep.